Hi guys, I want to talk to you today about cognition, intelligence, IQ, and measurement by gender, because this is something that is of special interest to me, and I don't feel like your book does as good a job with it as I would like. So let's get started. All right. Oops, go back. All right. So first, we have to start with some definitions. Before we can discuss gender differences in cognition and measurement, we need to understand what cognition is and is not, and what intelligence is and is not, and what IQ is. So cognition is essentially the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. So what does that mean? Basically, what I want you to focus on in this sentence is that it is about acquiring knowledge and understanding. It's whatever you have to do to acquire knowledge and understanding about the world around you. Intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. Okay, so we see the word knowledge in both of these, but I want you to kind of tease them apart a little bit. Intelligence comes in a lot of different forms, but the general umbrella definition is about how you get your knowledge and how you apply it. Okay. IQ is a measure of some types of intelligence, and we're going to talk about that more as we go on. All right. So I find it's a little easier to explain this concept as a visual. So intelligence is a component of cognition. So up here we have intelligence, and cognition is comprised of all of these things. So I'm going to come back to executive function, but there's social, memory, attention, judgment, intelligence. You know, it is only a part of this, right? It's only a part of that. So executive function may or may not be something that you're aware of, but it's essentially the ability to plan, focus, remember, juggle tasks, self-regulate. You know, sometimes you'll hear that people with ADHD or something have problems with executive function, or people with Alzheimer's disease have problems with executive function. People with certain neurological disorders will have issues with executive function. Also, I just want to point out that executive function issues are kind of epidemic right now. You know, if you think about, we're all on our phones all the time, and there's every alert going off everywhere, and you know, our attention is being split all the time. That's going to impact planning, focus, remembering, juggling tasks, all of that stuff. So, you know, if you're like, oh my God, I have a problem with all of those things, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, except that you live in, you know, today's world. Okay, so intelligence has a lot of different components, right? So if you go back to this and you're looking at this, we're talking about this area up here, right? So it has all of these different components. It's you know, being picture smart, and music smart, and body smart, and people smart, and word smart, and logic smart, and nature smart, and smell and self smart. So IQ only measures a few of these. And if you think about it, if you've ever taken an IQ test, you'll know which two they are. They are these two. They are mathematical and linguistic. Okay. So cognition actually looks something like this. And the reason why the sizes are different is because it kind of like how this looks for you, and again, this is just a visual representation, right? How this looks for you depends on how much emphasis you put on each of these categories, and how hard you have to work at them. You know, like if you have to work really, really hard to remember something, your memory part of cognition is going to look very different than, you know, if your social stuff comes easy to you and it's a big part of your life, So anyway, intelligence is up here. This is intelligence. And again, it's got subparts to it. So, it's getting very complicated now. So originally we had cognition and we had these 6 parts to it, but now one of these 6 parts has 8 parts to it. So it's getting quite complicated. All right. So like I said before, what IQ tests measure are these 2 things, right? Mathematical and linguistic smarts. And that's a problem, right? Because all of these things, all of these other things are not at all measured by IQ tests. There are very few good, reliable measures for each of these, and a lot of reliable, good measures for these 2, right? And not just IQ tests. And a lot of what you're doing this week is learning about, why IQ tests are not great and why they don't work well for everybody. And this is just another component of that. But I do want to point out that there are ways to measure all these other things, but that there are just not as many, and they're not necessarily as strong. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about gender differences. And there's a lot of belief out there about the gender differences in IQ or intelligence or cognition. And now that you know the difference between these terms, you can kind of discern a little bit what that's all about. But the question I want to answer right now is, can you measure gender differences in intelligence, right? Again, on just those two measures with an IQ test? And the answer is no. Over the years, IQ tests have intentionally been refined to remove questions that show differences based on sex or gender. So even if there is a difference on those measures, you're not going to be able to see it from an IQ test. You're just not. It's designed not to show you that. So there's another problem with trying to measure gender differences in intelligence or cognition, and it's that they're culture dependent. So this is a little bit difficult to conceptualize, but spend a little bit of time with it. So as gender equality in a particular society increases, women's advantage in verbal areas also increases, and male advantage in math decreases. So if you think about this, like we know that males have an advantage in math, but we don't think as hard about the female advantage in verbal areas, but it does exist in most cultures that have gender equality or are headed towards gender equality. I'm not going to get into the politics of that right now, but basically the bottom line is that as societies become more equitable in terms of gender equality, that advantage that men have in math goes down. In some cultures, it completely disappears, and a gap appears or becomes much more obvious in verbal areas of women ability over male ability. Why that is for a different day, but that it is true. It is in the data. So I just kind of covered this part, but how a specific country measures on gender equality in general will impact how large the effect sizes are, right? Okay. So here's the other problem. They're age dependent. So when measuring sex differences in cognitive aptitudes and abilities, the age of the sample matters. Why would that be? This is complicated, right? This is about how women are socialized, women and girls are socialized in academic settings. So what this basically comes down to is, when you look at the research, is that women and girls before a certain age, and I don't recall exactly what age that is, but it's fairly young. Before a certain age, perform the same as males do in, say, math, right? And then after a certain age, a gap forms, and then it begins to widen, and it continues to widen as they get older. And so what this is about is basically about, being in a gendered society that values and expects men to have stronger mathematical abilities than women. So when you're measuring sex differences in that particular area, in that mathematical of the area, age definitely matters, because, before a certain age, you can be reasonably confident that you are actually measuring ability. But after a certain age, what you actually are measuring is not so much ability as much as it is, kind of all the other cultural stuff that goes along with it. So anyway, that is my my little presentation about IQ and cognition, and how to think about them as different, and to know the difference between cognition, IQ, intelligence, and a little bit about the gender differences there. It again is something that is very complicated, has quite a bit in it to explore. It might make a really good paper topic. So if you have any questions about that, please do let me know, and I would be happy to answer them. Okay, thanks.